So if we remember the 2016 election, we know that Hillary Clinton, the Democratic establishment, all their supporters blamed Bernie Sanders for the fact that Hillary Clinton lost. Despite the fact that Bernie campaigned super hard for Hillary, despite the fact that the vast majority of Bernie's supporters ended up voting for her, we and Bernie Sanders were blamed for her loss. And if you read this NBC article, they're already trying to pin Biden's failures at winning over progressives on Bernie Sanders and his movement. This piece basically says that Bernie Sanders dropped out about a month ago, and there's about a quarter of Bernie Sanders supporters that aren't sold on Biden, and that it's Bernie's fault. It's Bernie and his campaign's fault that those people aren't moving over to Joe Biden yet. It's not Biden's fault. It's not the DNC's fault. It's not anyone else's fault. It's only Bernie's responsibility to deliver those voters to Joe Biden. And I want to say that that is 100% BS. We've talked about it on this channel a whole bunch of times. Back in 2016 and even in the 2020 election, Bernie Sanders is a man of his word. He promised and delivered that if he didn't win the nomination, when he suspended his campaign, he would endorse the nominee and work on their behalf. Again, he did 41 events for Hillary Clinton, no fewer than 41. And he's already endorsed Joe Biden, and he's already done events with Joe Biden. And in all of his campaign events he's done since suspending, all of his live streams, he's talked about the importance of supporting Democrats and Joe Biden. He's done fundraising emails on official DNC email lists for the Democratic Party. He's even gone so far to say not supporting Joe Biden is irresponsible. If anything, the average Bernie Sanders supporter, the militant Bernie Sanders supporter at least, the sort of folks who watch my channel and watch other Bernie Sanders supporting channels, will tell you that Bernie Sanders has been too accommodating to Joe Biden and the Democrats this time around. He was too quick to endorse. He didn't get enough concessions. He was too quick to call his own supporters irresponsible for suggesting that they might not get involved with Joe Biden's campaign. And yet they're still trying to blame him for Joe Biden's emerging failures. The writing is not fully dry on the wall, but it's being written on the wall. And I've talked about this on this channel over and over again about how Joe Biden is running a losing campaign. The man can't communicate. The man can't run live streams. The man can't articulate a vision beyond the fact that he isn't Donald Trump and beyond the fact that he was Barack Obama's vice president. The man might not lose, but I think is setting the course to being defeated in a very winnable election unless something changes. And so the neoliberal media, the Democratic establishment, NBC, MSNBC, they're already looking to plant the evidence on Bernie, his campaign, and his movement, and his supporters. But Bernie, all the way back in 2016, I've talked about this before, made one thing very clear. Bernie's a man of his word. He's going to make the endorsement of the Democratic nominee, the presumptive nominee. A lot of his supporters won't agree with that. Ultimately, however, Bernie's endorsement, however much weight it carries, and it does carry weight. I'm sure that some people are supporting Biden right now because Bernie convinced them to do so. But Bernie's endorsement can't replace the need for Joe Biden, the Democratic Party, the Biden campaign, and all those folks to actually convince people themselves. Bernie's endorsement matters, and Bernie kept his word. But when the chips are down, it's Biden that has to convince people. And I've talked about it. Biden designed a platform largely, maybe not exclusively, but overwhelmingly designed to appeal to moderate suburbanites, to appeal to relatively well-off people that are purple voters. Not designed for working class folks, not designed for students, not designed for progressives, designed for people that were crucial in winning some of the swing districts in 2018. And maybe that's a good strategy. It failed for Hillary Clinton, mind you. Maybe it'll work for Biden. But when you make that decision, there are consequences. And the consequence is progressives, people that want definitive Green New Deals, Medicare for all, those sorts of policies are going to be disillusioned by your efforts. And they may not support you, or maybe they will, but they won't do so enthusiastically, and they won't say 6 months out that they're 100% with the Biden bros. It's not going to happen. That's not Bernie Sanders' fault. It's not his fault. It's not the fault of his campaign, his staff, his volunteers, his most fervent supporters. It's Biden's fault. Biden's making a choice to look at Medicare for all with potentially, at least according to some polling, 70% support among the general electorate, because right now most people are realizing, lo and behold, that having your insurance connected to your employment really, really sucks at the best of times, especially when you don't have employment. And he's saying, now we don't need Medicare for all. That's Biden. Bernie can only do so much to convince his people to back a man that ignores common sense and ignores the will of the Democratic Party and increasingly non-Republican voters. That means that independents are starting to realize that Bernie Sanders' policies are the ones that America needs, at least in broad terms. Joe Biden needs to do better. He needs to campaign better. He needs to bring forth better policies. And this is all beyond the fact of Tara Reade. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that no matter what, you won't back a man with the credible allegations that have come from Tara Reade. I totally sympathize with that perspective. But even if you do leave Tara Reade aside, I'm not saying you should, but if you do, we need to see far more from Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders and his campaign and his supporters will not be responsible for Joe Biden's loss. If anything, we are the ones, whether it's regular folks or whether it's those of us that have YouTube channels and those of us who have blogs and who write, we've been trying to warn the Democrats about this looming failure. Right now, they're complacent. They see the polling and the polling looks good, but we remember back in 2016, at this point, Clinton was polling better than Joe Biden. Her unfavorables were less unfavorable than Joe Biden, at least according to some polls, not all. And so what looked to be a lock for Hillary Clinton 6 months out from the election wasn't a lock, and she lost. And the Democrats also lost the Senate and the House. I'm not saying that's guaranteed to happen with Biden, but it could happen. And so they're complacent, though, because they've forgotten 4 years ago. And they said, hey, look, the strategy of winning over soft Republicans, that's what we're going for. And we're going to ignore turning out poor people, young people, racialized people, turning out the voters that Obama got to vote, but Hillary didn't. That's not our strategy. Our strategy is getting relatively well-off upper middle class people to vote Democrat and forget about the working masses. I don't know if that's going to work. We've been warning people about that. We've been warning people about Joe Biden's cognitive decline and dementia and how that's going to be an issue. We've been warning people about how Joe Biden doesn't know how to work the gosh darn internet. We've been warning people about how Biden's policies don't actually fit what regular people want. We've been warning people about the enthusiasm gap and how the enthusiasm gap more often than not determines who wins, and how the Biden-Trump enthusiasm gap is way bigger than the Trump-Hillary enthusiasm gap. The only gap in recent history that's been this large was Obama-McCain in 2008, and we know how badly Barack Obama beat John McCain in 2008. It was a stomping. We don't want that to happen to the Democrats this time. We don't, at least not most of us. And so we're trying to warn people. So all I'm saying is, come early November, Biden loses. I hope he doesn't. If it comes down to Biden versus Trump, I hope Biden wins. I don't want Biden to win because he's an awful person and he should be replaced based alone on what he did with Tara Reade. But if it comes down to it and Biden loses, look at yourself in the mirror before you blame Bernie and his supporters. Because at the end of the day, if you're being honest with yourself, you would have realized every step of the way we were warning you about this looming disaster.